The drama surrounding this situation isn't really about one game, one interception, or one post-game comment. It's about how blame gets assigned when things fall apart, and who ends up carrying it when the structure around them collapses. What started as a routine post-game media session quietly exposed a much bigger problem, one that Browns fans have been feeling all season but haven't fully confronted yet. Jeudy spoke calmly, chose his words carefully, and on the surface, nothing he said sounded outrageous. But when you actually listen to the substance of his answers, when you connect them to what happened on the field, a very different picture starts to form. Early on, Jeudy acknowledges that Shedeur made the right read and delivered a good pass. That part matters more than people realize. A receiver admitting the quarterback executed the play exactly as designed tells you something important. It tells you the ball was where it needed to be. It tells you the quarterback did his job in that moment. And yet, that admission is immediately followed by distance. There's no ownership, no follow-through, no recognition of what happened after the ball arrived. It becomes praise without weight, credit without commitment. That's usually the first sign that a player is protecting himself. As the questions move toward the offense as a whole, the language gets vaguer. No rhythm. Inconsistency. Need to watch the film. Those phrases sound responsible, but they are empty. They don't explain why drives died. They don't explain why opportunities disappeared. They don't explain why a young quarterback spent the night under siege. They simply float blame into the air and let it drift toward the most convenient landing spot. And in football, that landing spot is almost always the quarterback. The problem with that narrative is what actually happened on the field. Shedeur was far from perfect, and nobody pretending otherwise is being honest. He made mistakes. He threw interceptions. That's part of playing quarterback, especially as a young player in a broken environment. But those mistakes didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened behind a collapsing offensive line. They happened without a run game to slow the pass rush. They happened in weather that made timing routes harder. They happened while receivers failed to finish plays that were there to be made. When all of that stacks up, pretending the quarterback is the root cause isn't analysis, it's laziness. Coach Prime's comments stand in stark contrast, and that contrast matters. His response centers on growth, lessons, and the journey. He doesn't deflect responsibility. He doesn't isolate one player. He frames the loss as part of development, something that will ultimately help them down the line. That kind of messaging protects young players. It builds confidence instead of eroding it. It also tells you something about leadership. One voice is focused on progress. The other is focused on survival. What makes this situation uncomfortable is that Shedeur is being held to a standard that nobody else on that offense seems to share. When Shedeur throws an interception, it defines his entire night. When a receiver drops passes or fails to secure the ball in critical moments, it's just football. One play doesn't define who they are. That grace somehow only flows one direction. The quarterback wears the outcome. Everyone else gets to talk about film rules and moving forward. Listen closely to how Jeudy answers questions about his own mistakes. He talks about character. He talks about not letting one play define him. He talks about moving on. All of that sounds reasonable. But then ask yourself why that same logic doesn't apply to Shedeur. Why doesn't the same understanding exist when the quarterback is under constant pressure, forced to play hero ball, and asked to carry an offense that isn't functioning? Why does accountability stop at the most vulnerable position on the field? The truth is, Jeudy's words accidentally tell the real story. He confirms the pass was good. He confirms the play was there. He never says he failed to make the play, but he also never says the quarterback didn't. That silence does the damage. It lets the narrative tilt. It allows blame to settle on Shedeur without ever being spoken out loud. That's how quarterbacks get sabotaged without anyone technically lying. And this goes far beyond one receiver. The coaching failures were everywhere. The offensive line was a mess. The game plan never adjusted. There was poor clock management, bad challenges, special teams mistakes that directly impacted field position and momentum. When every single unit struggles in the same game, the problem is not the quarterback. It's leadership. It's preparation. It's structure. Shedeur was running for his life. That's not hyperbole. That's film. When a quarterback has no time to set his feet, when pressure arrives immediately, mistakes are inevitable. That doesn't excuse interceptions, but it explains them. Context matters. And anyone evaluating quarterbacks without context isn't interested in truth. They're interested in convenience. What's most frustrating is how quickly the conversation shifts away from the real issues. Instead of asking why the offensive line can't protect, why the play calling lacks rhythm, or why receivers aren't finishing plays, the focus narrows to one stat line. That's how organizations ruin young quarterbacks. They let veterans and coaches avoid scrutiny while the youngest guy in the room absorbs all the criticism. If accountability actually existed, the conversation would sound very different. A veteran receiver would say he hurt his quarterback. A coach would say the game plan failed. A staff would admit they didn't put their young player in a position to succeed. Instead, we get vague language, safe answers, and a slow push of responsibility downhill. This isn't about defending Shedeur blindly. It's about being honest. You cannot fairly judge any quarterback in this environment. You can't evaluate growth when the system is actively working against it. You can't demand perfection while providing chaos. And you certainly can't pretend interceptions tell the whole story when everything around the quarterback is breaking down simultaneously. Shedeur showed toughness. He stayed in the pocket. He kept competing. He didn't point fingers. He didn't hide. That matters, especially when things are going wrong. Those traits are harder to teach than mechanics or reads. They're foundational, and they're being tested every single week. The bigger question now is how long this continues. How long does the organization allow the same patterns to repeat? How long does the quarterback of the future take hits for failures that start above him? And how long before fans stop buying the idea that this is just growing pains instead of systemic dysfunction? Because one thing is clear. This wasn't a quarterback problem. This was an everything else problem. And blaming Shedeur is the easiest way to avoid dealing with the harder truth. So here's the real question for you. Is Shedeur being judged unfairly because of bad coaching and poor support? Do you think the Browns are setting him up to succeed or quietly letting him take the fall? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you're tired of lazy quarterback narratives, and subscribe for real football breakdowns that actually look at the full picture. Because this story isn't just about one game. It's about whether this franchise learns from its mistakes or repeats them again.